Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. So I've got my Dwarfs on the table again, another practice game, this time against the Bretonnians. If you're following this series with my Dwarves in the old world, it's the same list as last time, so it's led by a king. He's got a great weapon, full plate, shield bearers, master rune of smiting for the big d6 wounds, and 3 runes of shielding for a 4-up ward, and the rune of passage. He's sitting in a unit of 16 iron breakers with the master rune of hesitation. I've got a Thane BSB also on shield bearers with Grugny, the rune of courage and the rune of battle. And he's got the rune of Gromril on his armour, the rune of preservation, and also a rune of stone. So I've got the tanky Thane and the killy king. There's also a runesmith with 3 runes of spell breaking, and the runesmith and the Thane are in the unit of 31 rangers with all the upgrades and a rune of battle. There's a cannon with the rune of forging and 2 units of 7 iron drakes, each with the iron warden with the trollhammer torpedo. The Bretonnian Exiles from left to right, so you've got 3 peg knights with the champion, there's a bombard on the hill, we've got the yeoman guard, not sure how many there are, 30 or something, with 2 champions, a banner that denies the stand and shoot, which I can't remember the name of, and the BSB with the horn. There is a level 3 exiled wizard with Plague of Rust, Earthen Ramparts, and Travel Mystical Pathways. Obviously with the Lore Familiar to pick those spells. There's 2 units of 6 Knights of the Realm lurking behind the infantry. Interesting choice of deployment there, but we'll see how that pans out. On the right hand side, following a sort of gap in the centre of the Bretonnian deployment zone, hiding behind a wood, there's a Baron on a Hippogriff, and he's sporting, if I can remember correctly, I think it's just a standard loadout of Virtue of Heroism, a lance, the locket for immunity to killing blow, and probably 1 or 2 other items that I can't remember. 3 peg knights with the champion, identical unit to the one on the left flank, and of course the Green Knight lurking somewhere in the mist. Not to forget 5 scouting peasant archers, which, as you'll see, will be quite insignificant in this game because with a shooty list, there's not much point in them actually, trying to get involved in the game. But they're in the bottom left-hand corner there in the wood. So it is a bit of a funky deployment if you have a look at the table. So I'm sort of nestled in the bottom right-hand corner there. The Bretonnians are spread out in the top left with a sort of flanking force there, and another flanking force on the top right. The cannon and the bombard are on hills, but I don't really fancy the shootout between the two because obviously the bombard does d3 plus 1 wounds, and my cannon only does d3 wounds. A little bit more reliable perhaps on the dwarf side because I can take runes to reroll the artillery dice, but I find that the bombard misfire table is very forgiving. You can often roll a misfire and still shoot the next turn. Very sparse in the centre of the table, as you can see. The Bretonnians are trying this flanking tactic in this matchup, which you'll see how that pans out during the game. There's a lot of speed, of course, in the Bretonnians' army. The yeomen obviously seem like they're the weak link in the chain, but they've got Travel Mystical Pathways, so I guess they're going to be teleporting up the board. Everything else is either mounted on a horse or a flying horse. The units of knights are sort of in a line. So they need to watch out for my cannon, because if my cannon gets a flank shot, I might be able to bounce cannonball down the knights and take out a bunch of them with a flank arc. But we'll see if that is open to me during the game. The Green Knight could emerge from either the wood on the left of my deployment zone, or the one on the right of my right, or the Bretonnians' left of their deployment zone, opposite where my main force is deployed. As I said, we're in the bottom right defending the hill, currently out of range of most of our shooting, which is an issue which I've sort of considered during the list building, perhaps not enough, because what if the bombard takes out my cannon and then everything just stays back, which is a possible scenario in a tournament situation, right, where the enemy just wants to take out your artillery and then stay out of range of your shooting. The dwarves are never going to make it across the board into combat, and then what are you going to do? You're just going to lose the game by 100 points or 200 points or however many war machines they can take out. You have to bait them in somehow, which is good to have some kind of long-range artillery in order to bait your opponent forward. Or just move forward yourself, right? If I've got crossbows and trollhammer torpedoes, I suppose I only have to deploy at the edge of my deployment zone and move forward, or walk up for a couple of turns, and then I'll be in range with my shooting, and that hopefully will bait them in. But it's something to consider if I'm not scouting the Rangers, right? It's how do I draw an opponent in that doesn't want to come in, that just wants to stay at the back of the board, out of range of my guns, because if I don't take artillery, or the artillery is taken out by the opponent's artillery, then my range is somewhat limited. But that's something for me to think about in this building going forward. So Bretonnians turn 1, and the Green Knight emerges from the wood on the bottom left corner and rushes up to the flank of my line, and it's starting to become clear that the Bretonnians want to come around both sides, as of course they've deployed to do so, in order to outflank my line of Rangers. And everything rushes up that left side, the infantry teleporting 12-inch with the mystical pathways, and they get earthen ramparts up on that unit as well, which should protect them from my crossbow bolts as they're coming up the board. Meanwhile, on the right-hand side, the Baron on Hippogriff and the Pegs just stay put behind the woods. So I've got my Iron Drakes on the right-hand side, which they obviously don't want to rush into a hail of bullets just yet, although it looks like they will have to at some point, because those Iron Drakes aren't going anywhere. Dwarfs turn 1, and obviously the weakness of the line by getting in the flank is starting to make sense of this unusual deployment of this Exiles list. The Green Knight in the flank by himself isn't a huge threat. I mean, he'd need to do 4 wounds in order to draw the combat, or 5 wounds to win the combat, just because of my static combat res. Which he's definitely capable of doing, because he's got different options with his sword, but unlikely. And at the same time, there's the risk of him sort of tying up the unit by drawing combat, and then preventing it from shooting and preventing the runesmith from dispelling. What I end up doing is moving my king into the Rangers unit, and then I can challenge the Green Knight, right? So even though the Green Knight is at the edge of the Rangers unit, once you get the challenge, the characters move towards each other. I always wondered how you guys play it. It's always a bit ambiguous in the wording as to, obviously if there's 2 units and there's characters within those units, it just says the characters move towards each other. I suppose it doesn't matter too much, because after the challenge they'll just go back to their original position, but it might make a difference in terms of other units that are in the fight, and to what extent would that Green Knight move towards the king? Does the king just teleport to the side of the unit? The risk, of course, is that the Green Knight has a strength 6 multi-wound 2 sword, right? But on average dice he should only get 1 or 2 wounds, right? Because he's only going to get one. He's got 4 attacks. What is he hitting on 4s, and wounding on 3s, and I've got a 4-up ward save as well. Anyway, so despite the 5-up ward from the earthen ramparts, we take out a few of the Yeoman Guard with the crossbows. I can't get a decent line of sight on the Pegs or the Hippogriffs, so we just leave the Iron Drakes waiting patiently for them to come out of the woods so we can blast them. Brett's turn 2. So the Green Knight charges in alone, unafraid of the static combat res, busting him and popping him on the combat res. They get Plague of Rust off, though, on the Rangers, which is a problem. I'm out of range to dispel it. Travical Mystical Pathways on the block again, so this unit of Yeoman Guard is whizzing up the board with the Knights behind. The King challenges the Green Knight. Obviously, the King's got the Rune of Smiting, so with Hatred as well, I should kill that Green Knight on my turn and just, be done with it, at least for a turn or 2. So he teleports into the fighting rank to take on the Green Knight. But, to my horror, the Green Knight gets 4 hits, 4 wounds, and I only pass 1 ward save, and then boom, the King's dead, just like that. Just takes all 6 wounds off, because you only need 3 wounds to get 6 with multi-wounds 2. Absolute disaster on turn 2. Especially as I was just about to annihilate that Green Knight. So yeah, a little bit sanguine on my part to kill the Green Knight, which I didn't really need to do. So I feel kind of silly for declaring a challenge there, when I could have just allowed the Green Knight to attack the Rangers and probably won combat anyway. But the Rangers give ground, which is quite lucky from my part, actually, because I needed something like a 7, re-rollable of course with the BSB, on the break test, or I would have fall back in good order, or God forbid flee. But either way, if I fall back in good order, I'm off the board because I'm too close. So I swivel round, I go off the board. So luckily, though, I give ground, and there's not, apart from losing the king, there isn't another big consequence to that combat. Risky business, of course. Getting charged in the flank of a line. I should have challenged with the BSB actually, because he's got the rune of preservation, and so and that nullifies the multi wounds too. Anyway, learnt my lesson there, and the king is dead. Dwarfs turn 2, so I didn't actually get a picture from this turn, probably because I was still in shock from losing my king. When you get a big blow in a game of Warhammer, you're often kind of thinking about what I should have done, or have I forgotten about a ward save or something, and you're kind of in shock. So a bit of a blow there, losing the king, but let's see if I can salvage it. So the cannon rather, takes out a couple of the peg knights from a long range sort of horizontal shot, like in front of the building behind the wood. It's a bit of careless placing by the Bretts there, but I managed to take out 2 peg knights with 1 cannonball. So there's just the champion remaining, who passes his panic. Still no good shots forward, because obviously the pegs and the baron's still hiding. The iron breakers in the centre, still waiting to see if the knights are going to come into the centre of the board, but they're just holding their own there, and they just turn slightly to. But there isn't really much I can do. I'm just waiting to react to see what the Bretonnians do. Bretonnians turn 3, so the Yeoman Guard charge the Rangers, along with the Green Knight in the flank. And just look at that picture there. Classic Warhammer the Old World, with this epic corner clip charge. For those of you who follow my channel, you might have seen early last year, I did a video about the charge move in Warhammer the Old World, and I gave these examples of how you can have these corner clip charges, which the whole of the fighting rank fight, and so it's like a normal combat, but it just looks really silly. And this is just a kind of extreme example of that. It does happen, right? So you've got this, obviously in past editions, like 8th Edict, for example, the charging unit gets a free wheel during their charge move, in addition to closing the door or aligning to the enemy unit. And of course, you wouldn't be in a long line anyway in 8th edition, so you just wouldn't get these silly corner clip charges. But there we go. It's Warhammer the Old World. It is what it is. The Hippogriff and the Peg Knights, meanwhile, smell blood, and they come out of hiding in order to charge in turn 4. The Bombard takes out my cannon. That was always going to happen, because there's nothing else really the Bombard can shoot. But the cannon did its job, to be honest, taking out a couple of those Peg Knights, and the remaining champion is now just in hiding, and therefore those Peg Knights aren't going to play much of a role in the game henceforth. In combat, the Rangers beat off the Yeoman Guard, and the Green Knight is popped on the combat rest. So, my line defeats his line, and the Yeoman Guard give ground, so they don't get a reform. One of these situations where give ground is not as good as fall back in good order. The Rangers reform in a way to prevent them from charging again next turn, right? Because we can swivel a little bit and just reduce our frontage a little bit so that the Yeoman Guard are no longer facing the line of Rangers. Dwarfs turn 3 is a quick one, but a significant one. So the Rangers are able to unload into the Baron on Hippogriff, and with lots of shots going in, because obviously the back rank can shoot as well, and with the Armour Bane 4, meaning that we take several wounds off him, and then the Iron Drakes are able to finish him off with the Drake guns. So revenge for my king is complete, as the Bretonnian general is also dead on turn 3. Bretonnians turn 4, so the Green Knight emerges in front of our lines this time, in the wood at the top right there, and can't make it into combat with the initial movement. The Peg Knights do though, and they charge into the Iron Drakes on the right hand side, and they lose one of them to the stand and shoot. In combat they kill 3 Iron Drakes, but they only end up drawing the combat, so they're stuck. On the left hand flank then, the Yeoman Guard and the Knights just sort of reform in order to line up charges in turn 5. They're kind of getting in each other's way, and so they're kind of wasting a turn having to reposition. The Knights in the centre are facing down my Iron Breakers, but we've got the Rune of Hesitation, we're stubborn, we're Iron Breakers. those knights are never going to charge into those Ironbreakers with the Rune of Hesitation, so they just turn around and sort of ride off into the sunset. They've sort of trotted up the board and then just galloped away again, so they've kind of just spent the game riding around. And then we move on to Dwarfs turn 4. So the line uses a free wheel to turn to face to the left, right? Because I want to get those incoming units into my front arc. The Ironbreakers also reposition a bit more to the left so they can countercharge. If those knights come into the line, then the Ironbreakers can hit the flank of the knights or the Yeoman Guard or whatever it is. Meanwhile, the Iron Drakes on the right-hand side lose combat to the Peg Knights, fall back, and the Peg Knights follow up. Bretonnians turn 5, so the Green Knight charges into the Iron Drakes, who can't harm him with the Standard Shoot or in hand-to-hand, so they've just got to take the charge. The Yeoman Guard charge into the Rangers for a last hurrah to try and push these dwarfs off the battlefield. The Knights, however, change their mind about charging because, first of all, the Standard Shoot is going to take out a few of them as they come in. And also there's those Ironbreakers threatening the flank charge if they do, make it into the Rangers and survive the combat anyway. So they just decide to stay put. In combat, the Thane challenges and fights the unit champion. The Yeomen take out a few Rangers, but there's too many great weapons swinging in, and the Bretonnian foot soldiers are forced back. However, due to the funny angle by which they fall back, just marking centre to centre with the line, they end up fleeing the table, and so the Yeoman Guard are off along with the level 3 Exile Wizard. So, the infantry have gone. The Peg Knights finish off the Iron Drakes on the right-hand side. And that's kind of concludes the main part of the battle. In Dwarfs turn 5, we just reform and consolidate, and we fire off a few crossbow shots, but don't really do too much. And on turn 6, again, not much happens, right? The Green Knight finishes off the Iron Drakes that he's in combat with. The Peg Knights don't charge because what are they going to charge? The Green Knight doesn't need help finishing off those Iron Drakes, and if they charge into my Rangers, they might just end up dying and giving away the points for the Peg Knights. So that's what these little units of 3 Peg Knights do, is that they sort of get damaged and then they just fly away and you don't get any points for them. Anyway, once again the line is undefeated and we tot up the points. So quite a quick game against an Exiles list which I've got experience playing against already. The Dwarfs lost the Iron Drakes, the King and the Cannon. The Brets lost the Yeoman Guard, level 3, the Baron on Hippogriff, and that's it, I think, and the BSB, right? So I think it's just a slim, narrow win to the Dwarfs, but quite close, basically a draw. What have I learned? Well, I've got to think hard about challenging the Green Knight and do the maths first, because basically you've got to think about combat res, right? The Green Knight charges in solo to your big unit. You normally don't really need to do anything because he's going to lose combat unless he rolls well on his dice. I guess I was too eager to get the Rune of Smiting into that Green Knight and roll my d6 wounds. But lost the King, and hopefully won't do that again. I need to think hard about how I'm going to play the King in the future. I'm yet to play a dragon with this list, so I need to play a dragon a couple of times first and sort of think about what works against the dragon. But I might even go a defensive King and a defensive Thane, maybe one with the toughness 10 and one with the Rune of Preservation, and so I can just take the challenge. If I'm up against loads of strength 6 stomps, then you're up against my toughness 10 King, whereas if you've got like an Ogre Blade or a Green Knight, then you're up against the Rune of Preservation, and do it that way. So I've always got something to take a challenge with. The make way and the challenge is a great way of countering the flank charge into the line. I think a line on its own without characters is playing a very risky game, because if you expose a flank, you're done. But with Dwarfs, you've got good options with the King on Shield Bearers, the Thane on Shield Bearers, so I've just got to try, playing around with different rune options with the King and Thane, and see what makes the final cut, so I can take my list to an event and do the Dwarfs justice. The Baron on the Hippogriff never made it into combat. Obviously, there were some scouting peasants that were also relevant. It was a bit of a weird game because obviously it wasn't like two armies clashing with each other. It was more flanking shenanigans and so on. But these are the types of games that I want more practice at, where my opponent is thinking hard about how to deal with the line, because obviously it's something that it's very hard to just move and charge in the front, because you're going to take a load of shots and then you're going to get a load of great weapons in, and it's quite strong, and you've got to think about how you're going to deal with it. So that was a good experience for me. But yeah, hope you like it, guys. Once again, hit that like button, leave a comment, let me know some tips on what you think if you like it, and I'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye.